The silver fork clinked against the baccarat crystal with a delicacy that brutally contrasted with the words Gregory Mitchell was about to utter. Samantha felt her stomach clench even before her husband opened his mouth, an instinct developed over 3 years of marriage that allowed her to anticipate every coming humiliation. "You really need to learn how to behave in public, darling," Gregory said, his voice laden with disdain as he cut his filet mignon with precise movements. "That laugh of yours at yesterday's event was absolutely classless. My God, people looked at you as if you were an intrusive waitress." Jessica Crawford, seated at the table with a familiarity that transformed the intimate dinner into something profoundly obscene, covered her mouth with her hand, but not quickly enough to hide her malicious smile. Her blue eyes gleamed with a refined cruelty, the kind that only blossoms in people who have never known true adversity. Samantha lowered her eyes to her untouched plate at the French restaurant in Portland, Oregon, feeling the heat creep up her neck. Chateau Beaumont was known for its discretion, which explained why Gregory had chosen that particular venue for this farce. Strategically spaced tables, dim lighting, and a clientele that had mastered the art of ignoring what didn't concern them. "Gregory, this isn't necessary," she murmured, keeping her voice steady despite the storm swirling in her chest. "Not necessary?" Gregory repeated, leaning back in his chair with that arrogant posture she had initially mistaken for confidence. "Jessica and I were just commenting on how you insist on embarrassing me. Isn't that right, Jess?" Jessica nodded eagerly, her perfectly waved blonde hair swaying as if in a shampoo commercial. "Absolutely true. Honestly, Samantha, for someone married to one of the West Coast's top investment brokers, you really should try harder to measure up." The words were sharp as scalpels, designed to cut deep. Samantha had only known Jessica Crawford for 6 months, ever since Gregory had hired her as his executive assistant. A job description that apparently included romantic dinners and weekend getaways that Gregory barely bothered to hide. "I know this must be difficult for you to accept," Gregory continued, his voice taking on that paternalistic tone he used when he wanted to appear magnanimous. "But Jessica and I have a real connection. Intellectual, spiritual, something you could never understand." Samantha finally raised her eyes, meeting her husband's gaze. There was a time when those brown eyes made her feel safe. Now, they merely reflected an emptiness. She wondered if it had always been there, invisible beneath the veneer of charm he had used to win her over. "And what exactly do you want me to do with this information, Gregory?" Samantha asked, her voice more controlled than she felt. Jessica chuckled, a crystalline sound that echoed softly in the space around them. "Well, I think he's trying to be gentle, preparing you for the inevitable." Gregory took Jessica's hand across the table, a gesture so brazenly public that it made Samantha's blood boil. "Divorce is coming, Sam. Be realistic. You've had 3 good years of my last name, access to a life you would never have achieved on your own. Consider it a gift. And when this is over, Jessica and I can finally stop hiding." Hiding. Samantha almost laughed at the irony. "Gregory, you dine in public restaurants. You take her to business events. The only person being hidden here is me." "Unnecessary drama." Gregory rolled his eyes, letting go of Jessica's hand to pick up his glass of red wine. "You've always had a tendency for the melodramatic. It's exhausting, frankly." Samantha watched her husband drink the $1,000 wine, the bottle he had ordered without consulting her, just as he made all decisions without consulting her. 3 years ago, she had been a young social worker working with underserved communities in Seattle, dedicated and idealistic. Gregory had appeared at a corporate charity event, all charm and promises, painting a future where she could make even more of a difference with the resources he offered. The promises had quickly dissolved. First, there were subtle suggestions that she quit her job. "A wife of mine doesn't need to work," he'd say. Then came the criticisms about her clothes, her friends, her interests. Gradually, Samantha had become a ghostly version of herself, floating through the mansion in Lake Oswego like an expensive and rarely appreciated decoration. "The masquerade ball next week?" Jessica suddenly said, her eyes lighting up with malicious excitement. "We'll be there together, of course. It will be our first official appearance as a couple." "The ball is still 2 months away, Jess," Gregory corrected, but his smile indicated he approved of her enthusiasm. "It doesn't matter," Jessica waved her hand, dismissing the temporal detail. "The point is, we can finally stop this charade. Gregory deserves a woman who truly understands him, who can move in the same circles without looking like a fish out of water." Samantha felt something shift within her at that moment. It wasn't anger, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't sadness, though her heart was broken in ways she was still discovering. It was something colder, more calculated, a clarity that cut through the fog of humiliation and self-doubt that had been her constant companion for the past few months. "I understand," Samantha said calmly, placing her napkin on the table and picking up her purse. "I seem to have lost my appetite." "Samantha, don't be dramatic," Gregory sighed, but made no move to stop her. "I'm not being dramatic, Gregory. I'm just acknowledging reality, as you suggested." She stood up, adjusting the simple dress that Jessica had mentioned was suitable for afternoon tea, but certainly not for Chateau Beaumont. "You'll find the divorce papers ready next week," Gregory informed her casually, as if discussing a business meeting. "My lawyer is already preparing everything. I'm being generous with the settlement, considering you haven't contributed financially to our assets." Jessica squeezed Gregory's arm, a possessive gesture that made it clear how comfortable she already was in the role of future wife. "I'm sure Samantha will be reasonable. She seems smart enough to know when a battle isn't worth fighting." Samantha looked at the two of them, sitting there with their superior expressions and their glasses of expensive wine, completely convinced of their own importance. Gregory, with his $3,000 suit and his Patek Philippe watch. Jessica, with her designer dress and her jewelry borrowed from Gregory's corporate gifting department. "You're going to the Heartwood Foundation masquerade ball, then?" Samantha asked calmly. Gregory seemed surprised by the question. "It's the social event of the season. Obviously, we'll be there." "Why?" "Just curious," Samantha replied, a small smile touching her lips. "I hope you enjoy your evening." "Si choose." She turned and walked through the restaurant, past the tables with their elegant patrons and whispered conversations. The maitre d' opened the door for her, his eyes carrying a silent compassion that suggested he had witnessed similar scenes many times before. The Portland night was cold and damp, typical of October. Samantha took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt something beyond resignation. A purpose was forming, a determination that had been buried beneath layers of criticism and manipulation. Gregory and Jessica had no idea who Samantha truly was, what she had built away from his critical eyes. They saw her as a disposable wife, an inconvenient obstacle in the path of what they considered their manifest destiny together. The masquerade ball would be revealing in more ways than they could imagine. Samantha's black Mercedes glided smoothly through the wrought iron gate of the mansion in Lake Oswego, leaving behind the property that had never truly felt like home. The lights of Portland twinkled in the distance like terrestrial stars, indifferent to the personal drama unfolding beneath their glow. Samantha drove for 20 minutes until she reached the Pearl District, parking in front of a converted industrial building few knew her connection to. The old elevator creaked up to the 4th floor, where a single steel door opened to a space Gregory had never seen. Samantha typed in the code, and the fluorescent lights revealed what had been her secret sanctuary for the past 18 months. A functional office filled with files, computers, and whiteboards covered with notes and flowcharts. "Are you all right?" Diane Carter's voice emerged from the small kitchen in the corner, carrying 2 cups of tea. At 52, Diane was one of Oregon's most respected corporate law attorneys, with practical gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Samantha accepted the cup, allowing herself a moment to absorb the warmth through her hands. He announced the divorce today, in front of her, as if he were presenting a quarterly report. Diane sat down in one of the swivel chairs, her face showing the controlled irritation of someone who had witnessed many powerful men underestimate the women around them. "And the other one?" "Jessica is convinced she'll be the next Mrs. Mitchell. They plan to attend the ball together, a first official appearance as a couple." Samantha couldn't help the bitter tone that crept into her words. "Perfect," Diane said, opening her laptop. "That makes everything much more convenient. Speaking of which, the final transfer was confirmed this morning. All funds are exactly where they need to be." Samantha walked over to the larger whiteboard, observing the complex web of information she had meticulously compiled. At the center was the Heartwood Foundation, a charitable organization she had created 18 months ago, using every cent of the inheritance her grandmother had left her. $15 million that Gregory didn't know existed, protected by an irrevocable trust established years before she met him. Gregory had assumed that Samantha came from a modest middle-class family. Technically, that was true. Her father had been a teacher, her mother a nurse. But Samantha's maternal grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, had been a shrewd investor who had turned a small inheritance into a considerable fortune. She had died 6 months before Samantha's wedding, leaving everything to her granddaughter with one condition. The money was to be used to make a real difference in the world. Samantha had honored that wish in ways her grandmother would approve of. The Heartwood Foundation focused on 3 areas: affordable housing, support for survivors of domestic violence, and educational programs for disadvantaged communities. In 18 months, it had helped over 200 families and established partnerships with organizations across the state. And Gregory had no idea about any of this. "Is the foundation board confirmed for tomorrow?" Samantha asked, turning to Diane. "Everyone will be there at 10. Margaret Wu from the Housing Association, Robert Chen from the Women's Legal Center, and Dr. Patricia Morrison from the University of Oregon. They're eager to discuss the ball proposal." Samantha nodded, feeling the familiar rush of purpose that had sustained her in recent months. When Gregory began to grow more openly cruel, when Jessica appeared with her toxic arrogance, Samantha had channeled her pain into something productive. Every insult had become motivation. Every humiliation, fuel. "Are you sure about exposing everything publicly?" Diane asked, her voice carrying the professional caution of someone who had seen vengeful plans go wrong. "Once you do this, there's no turning back." Samantha considered the question as she sipped her tea. The truth was, she wasn't seeking revenge in the traditional sense. She didn't want to destroy Gregory or Jessica. She wanted something simpler and, paradoxically, more devastating. She wanted them to see who she truly was. She wanted them to confront their own insignificance. "It's not about revenge," Samantha said finally. "It's about truth. Gregory built his entire self-image on being superior to me. Jessica feeds on the fantasy that she won some prize by stealing him. They need to understand they were playing a game I was never interested in playing." Diane smiled, a rare gesture that transformed her serious face. "Your grandmother would be proud." Samantha's phone vibrated. A message from Gregory. "I left the preliminary divorce documents on your home office desk. Read them when you're ready to be rational." Her home office. The small room on the second floor that Gregory had designated for her, as if doing her a favor. A claustrophobic space filled with books he had never bothered to ask about, projects he had dismissed as bored wife hobbies. He sent the documents. Samantha showed Diane her phone. "Let me guess. He's offering crumbs and expecting gratitude." Samantha opened the scanned documents Gregory had attached. Her eyes scanned the terms. She would keep her car, some jewelry, and a one-time payment of $200,000. The mansion, the investment accounts, the vacation properties, everything would remain with Gregory. In exchange, she would sign a comprehensive confidentiality agreement and waive any future claims. "He actually believes I should be grateful for this," Samantha murmured, more to herself than to Diane. "Men like Gregory always believe they're being generous, even when they're being predatory," Diane replied, her voice laden with years of experience representing women in similar situations. "He sees you as an investment that didn't yield the expected dividends." Samantha put her phone aside, turning her attention back to the whiteboard. There was the timeline for the masquerade ball, every detail planned with surgical precision. The event would take place in 6 weeks at the historic Benson Hotel in the heart of Portland. 500 guests, including the city's social and philanthropic elite. Gregory had bought tickets as soon as they were announced, eager for networking and display. What he didn't know was that Samantha, through the Heartwood Foundation, had become the event's largest donor. $5 million designated to expand services for trauma survivors. The contribution had been made anonymously, but the ball's tradition required that the main benefactor be revealed during the evening, with all the pomp and ceremony such occasions demanded. "The response to our invitation?" Samantha asked, referring to the request they had made to be the night's surprise reveal. "Approved unanimously. The ball committee is thrilled. A donation of that size is historical for them." Diane paused, her eyes meeting Samantha's. "They want you to give a speech." Samantha felt her stomach clench. Public speaking had always been challenging for her, one of the many things Gregory ridiculed. But this was different. This wouldn't be about her impressing people who didn't care. It would be about giving voice to the work that truly mattered. "I'll do it," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. The next few hours passed in detailed planning. Diane reviewed the legal aspects of the impending divorce, identifying the flaws in the settlement Gregory had proposed. Samantha updated the files on the Foundation's projects, preparing for the board meeting. There was a beauty in the meticulousness of the work, a sense of control that drastically contrasted with the chaos Gregory had introduced into her life. It was almost midnight when Samantha finally prepared to leave. The city had grown even colder, and a fine drizzle began to fall, typical of a Pacific Northwest autumn. Diane walked her to the elevator, her expression a mix of maternal concern and professional approval. "You don't have to go back to that house tonight," Diane offered. "I have a guest room." Samantha considered it, but shook her head. "I need to keep up appearances for a little longer. If Gregory suspects something is happening, he might become difficult." "Just be careful. Men like him don't like losing control." The mansion was dark when Samantha arrived, except for the light from Gregory's office. She could see him through the window, hunched over his desk, likely reviewing portfolios or planning his next financial conquest. For a moment, she felt a pang of something that might have been longing, not for him specifically, but for the illusion she had allowed herself to believe. The fantasy of a partner, a companion, someone who saw her as an equal. But fantasies were dangerous. They obscured reality and allowed people like Gregory to operate with impunity. Samantha entered silently through the side door, going straight up to her room. The divorce documents were on her home office desk, exactly as Gregory had said. She picked them up, not to reread them, but to remind her of what was at stake. It wasn't money, which she didn't need. It wasn't status, which she had never desired. It was dignity. It was truth. It was the refusal to allow Gregory's narrative about who she was to become the official story. In the bathroom mirror, Samantha studied her reflection. At 31, she looked younger than she felt, with brown hair falling in natural waves and green eyes that Gregory had once called extraordinary before he started calling them ordinary. There were lines of tension around her mouth, marks of forced smiles and swallowed words. But there was also something new, a determination that hadn't been there 3 months ago, a clarity that came from finally stopping her self-doubt and starting to act. Morning arrived with that diffuse luminosity characteristic of Portland, where the sun constantly battles layers of persistent clouds. Samantha woke early, as had become her habit in recent months, before Gregory came down for his elaborate coffee and his morning routine of checking Asian markets. She dressed with calculated care. A gray pantsuit and blazer that Gregory had once commented was acceptable, but without personality. Perfect for remaining invisible. Her office in the Pearl District was vibrant with energy when she arrived at 9:30. Margaret Wu was already there, reviewing reports on her tablet, her red-framed glasses reflecting the screens. At 43, Margaret had dedicated her career to affordable housing, transforming abandoned buildings into thriving communities. Samantha admired her deeply, not just for her work, but for her unwavering authenticity. "Last quarter's numbers are extraordinary," Margaret said without looking up, her accent lightly marked by her childhood in Taiwan. "We managed to house 23 more families in the Southeast Division project. The children are already enrolled in local schools." Samantha felt that familiar sense of accomplishment, so different from the emptiness that permeated her domestic life. Every family helped represented a tangible victory, a stark contrast to the years spent as a silent ornament at Gregory's corporate events. Robert Chen arrived exactly at 10, as always, carrying his worn leather briefcase and a box of donuts from the Korean shop on the corner. His work at the Women's Legal Center had made him a silent legend in Portland, a lawyer who had chosen purpose over profit decades ago and never looked back. "I brought everyone's favorites," he announced, his voice carrying that warm tone that immediately put people at ease. "And also updates on the cases the Foundation is sponsoring. We have 3 women who secured successful restraining orders this week, and 2 are in safe housing." Dr. Patricia Morrison was the last to arrive, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, dressed in her characteristic academic bohemian style, a colorful tunic over jeans and hiking boots. At 61, she had mentored Samantha for a brief period in college, years before Gregory entered her life. "Sorry, I'm late," Patricia said, accepting a coffee from Diane. Department meeting that should have been an email, as always. As everyone settled around the impromptu conference table, Samantha felt the weight of gratitude. These people had believed in her when she appeared 18 months ago with an inheritance, a plan, and still fresh emotional scars. They hadn't questioned her motives or judged her situation. They simply helped her turn pain into purpose. "Let's begin." Diane opened the meeting, her efficiency cutting through any unnecessary formality. Everyone knows about the masquerade ball and the planned reveal. We need to discuss how this might impact the Foundation's operations. Margaret was the first to speak. The exposure will be significant. A $5 million donation gets attention, especially when revealed so dramatically. We need to be prepared for an influx of interest, both positive and negative. I agree, Robert added, adjusting his glasses. And there's the issue of your husband. Once he finds out about the Foundation, about the resources you have, the divorce situation could become considerably more complicated. Samantha had considered this countless times in recent weeks. Gregory was many things, but stupid was not one of them. When he discovered she had been operating a multi-million-dollar foundation right under his nose, his reaction would be unpredictable. The wounded ego of a man accustomed to absolute control was a dangerous variable. That's why timing is crucial, Diane interjected, distributing documents. Samantha will file her response to Gregory's divorce petition 3 days before the ball. These documents reveal the existence of her grandmother's trust and make it clear that she doesn't need anything from him financially. More importantly, they expose several inconsistencies in Gregory's financial records that could indicate irregularities. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. You're using the element of surprise to disarm him. Smart, but risky. Everything in this situation is risky, Samantha admitted, her voice firmer than she expected. But continuing as an invisible, grateful wife while he publicly ridicules me is also risky. At least this way, I'm choosing my own terms. Margaret reached across the table and took her hand. You're not alone in this. We're all here. The meeting progressed through logistical details. How to manage the expected increase in donation requests, media strategies to frame the narrative about the Foundation, and contingency plans should Gregory attempt legal retaliation. Robert had prepared a comprehensive defense, anticipating every possible move. There's also the matter of the other woman, Patricia mentioned delicately. Jessica, right? Will she be at the ball with him? Eat. That's their plan, Samantha confirmed, feeling that familiar pang of humiliation that came with thinking of Jessica. A first official appearance as a couple. Her words, not mine. Then she'll be part of his public downfall, Margaret observed emotionlessly. I don't know whether to feel pity or satisfaction. Diane smiled coldly. Personally, I'm leaning towards satisfaction. Jessica Crawford made conscious choices. She knew he was married, she chose to participate in Samantha's public humiliations, and now she believes she's won some prize. Reality will be a harsh teacher. Samantha wasn't sure how she felt about Jessica. There was anger, certainly, but also a strange kind of pity. Jessica was so convinced of her own superiority, so certain she had won some competition Samantha had never entered. When the truth was revealed, when Jessica realized that Gregory had chosen her precisely because she was manageable and impressionable, the fall would be brutal. I've prepared a media briefing, Diane continued, pulling out more documents. When the reveal happens, there will be questions. Many questions. You need to be prepared to speak not only about the Foundation, but about why you kept everything private. And what do I say? Samantha asked, feeling for the first time the true magnitude of what she was about to do. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes carrying that wisdom that came from decades of navigating academic and social politics. You tell the truth, that your grandmother left you resources with the specific purpose of making a difference, that you took that responsibility seriously and worked quietly because the work mattered more than recognition. And if they ask about Gregory, you simply say that your personal life is separate from your philanthropy. But it's not, Samantha objected. Not really. The foundation became my survival. Every time he called me useless, I came here and saw the families we had helped. Every time Jessica laughed at my clothes or my manners, I reviewed the numbers of women we had pulled out of abusive situations. This isn't separate from my personal life. It's what kept me sane. The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Everyone around that table had, in one way or another, chosen meaningful work over more superficial rewards. They understood. Then you talk about resilience, Robert said gently, about transforming personal challenges into community impact. This isn't weakness, Samantha. It's the most powerful story you can tell. The meeting extended through lunchtime, with Diane ordering Thai food from a nearby restaurant. They worked through scenarios, prepared responses, and refined strategies. By 3 in the afternoon, Samantha felt as though she had run a mental marathon, but there was also a sense of readiness, of finally being prepared for what was to come. When the others left, only she and Diane remained in the office. The afternoon light filtered through the large industrial windows, casting long shadows across the space. "Are you sure about this?" Diane asked for the second time in as many days. Not about the foundation or the exposure, about Gregory, about burning that bridge so completely. Samantha walked to the window, watching the streets of Portland below. People going about their lives, each carrying their own stories, struggles, and triumphs. For 3 years, she had felt separate from it all, trapped in a glass bubble of Gregory's own making, watching real life happen elsewhere. "The bridge is already burned," she said finally. "Gregory just hasn't realized it yet. He thinks he's discarding an inconvenient wife. In reality, I'm leaving a marriage that died long ago. The only difference is that I won't go quietly, allowing his narrative about who I am to become the official story." Her phone vibrated. Another message from Gregory. "Dinner at 7 at Higgins. Wear something appropriate. We have investors to impress." Samantha showed the message to Diane, who rolled her eyes. "He really believes he can continue like this until the divorce is finalized." "He believes he's still in control," Samantha corrected, typing a simple reply confirming her presence. "And I'm going to let him believe that for 4 more weeks. Then everything changes." Higgins was filled with executives in expensive suits and calculated conversations when Samantha arrived promptly at 7. Gregory was already seated at a table near the window, flanked by 2 middle-aged men she vaguely recognized from previous events. He waved impatiently, a gesture that seemed more like summoning an employee than greeting a wife. Samantha crossed the restaurant with measured steps, aware of the appraising glances that followed her. She had chosen a simple, elegant slate-blue cashmere dress, discreet enough not to offend Gregory's sensibilities, but well-made enough to silence any immediate criticism. Her jewelry was minimal, the pearl earrings her grandmother had worn at her own wedding. "Gentlemen, this is my wife, Samantha." Gregory introduced them without rising, a small sign of disrespect that did not go unnoticed by the investors who, nonetheless, had the decency to stand. "Samantha, these are Richard Holbrook and David Ashworth from Pinnacle Investments in New York." She shook their hands, noticing how Richard held hers a second too long, his eyes carrying that unwelcome familiarity some men seemed to believe was charm. David, at least, maintained a distant professionalism. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Richard said, his Brooklyn accent still noticeable despite decades presumably trying to refine it. Gregory never mentioned he had such a charming wife. Gregory chuckled, but there was a tightness in his jaw. "Samantha prefers to stay behind the scenes. She's quite shy about the business world." Not shy, Samantha thought as she took her seat. Bored, There was a significant difference between the two, but Gregory had never bothered to learn which. The conversation flowed around her as it always did, words about emerging markets, investment opportunities, and projected returns. Gregory was in his element, gesticulating with his whiskey glass, weaving narratives about his financial victories with the confidence of someone who mistook luck for skill. Richard and David listened with the kind of courteous attention wealthy men gave each other, each assessing if the other was worth their time and money. Samantha ordered only a glass of white wine and a salad, knowing anything more elaborate would result in later comments about her appetite or food choices. She had become an expert at becoming invisible on these occasions, physically present but absent in any meaningful sense. "And you, Mrs. Mitchell?" David turned to her unexpectedly, catching her mid-sip of wine. "How do you spend your days? I imagine maintaining a home like the one Gregory described must be full-time work." Gregory answered before she could. "Samantha has her little projects. Volunteer work, gardening, things like that. Nothing too demanding." Little projects. The words echoed in Samantha's mind with almost comical irony. A $15 million foundation that had changed hundreds of lives. Reduced to little projects in Gregory's casual narrative. "Actually," Samantha said calmly, her voice cutting through Gregory's presumption, "I've been quite involved with community work. Affordable housing, primarily. There's a tremendous need in Portland." Richard nodded politely, but his interest was already drifting back to Gregory. David, however, held her gaze for a moment longer, something akin to genuine curiosity in his eyes. "It's important work," David said. "My sister does something similar in Boston. She always says it's more rewarding than anything I do in finance." He smiled, a self-conscious gesture that humanized his sharp executive features. Gregory interrupted before the conversation could develop. "Lovely, but let's get back to what matters. Richard, about that green tech opportunity you mentioned." And so Samantha was pushed back into invisibility, a role she had played so many times it had become second nature. She ate her salad mechanically, responded when directly addressed, and maintained the neutral expression of polite interest Gregory expected. It was only when Richard mentioned the masquerade ball that her attention truly sharpened. "I heard you got tickets," Richard was saying, genuine envy in his voice. "Those sold out in 72 hours. How did you manage it?" Gregory leaned back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. "I have my contacts, and frankly, events like this are essential for high-level networking. Everyone who matters in Portland will be there." "We'll be in Seattle that night, unfortunately," David said, "but I hear it's going to be spectacular. Apparently there's a big surprise planned, a donor reveal that's being kept under wraps." Samantha felt her heart quicken slightly, but maintained her unchanging expression. She brought her wine glass to her lips, a casual gesture that disguised the adrenaline that suddenly flooded her veins. "There's always some theatrical drama at these events," Gregory dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Probably some tech executive seeking attention. But the real action happens in private conversations, in the relationships you build away from the spotlight." "Are you going with Gregory?" Richard asked Samantha, his eyebrow raised in a way that suggested he already suspected the answer. There was a moment of heavy silence. Samantha could feel Gregory weighing his options, deciding how much of the truth to reveal. She decided to make it easy for him. "I'm not sure yet," she said lightly. "Gregory has business commitments for the evening." It was the lie Gregory needed, the graceful exit that allowed him to save face while planning to attend with Jessica. She saw the instant relief in his eyes, quickly followed by that familiar expression of condescending gratitude, as if she had done something extraordinary by simply not making a scene. "Exactly," Gregory agreed quickly. Samantha understands that these events are primarily professional for me. She prefers to avoid the social circus anyway. More lies piled upon lies, building a narrative that had little to do with reality. But Samantha let it pass, knowing that in 4 weeks, all those careful untruths would spectacularly unravel. The rest of the dinner dragged on with numbing predictability. Richard drank too much and became increasingly effusive about his own achievements. David maintained a polite reserve, occasionally asking intelligent questions that revealed a sharp mind behind his cautious demeanor. Gregory orchestrated everything like a conductor leading a familiar symphony, never missing an opportunity to promote himself while subtly diminishing anyone who threatened his narrative of superiority. When they finally finished, it was almost 10 o'clock. Richard and David headed to their hotel, promising to continue discussions in the morning. Gregory and Samantha walked to their separate cars, a practice that had become routine in recent months. "You behaved appropriately tonight," Gregory commented as he adjusted his tie in the parking lot. It wasn't a compliment, exactly, more a performance review. That thing about affordable housing was unnecessary, but at least you weren't embarrassing. Samantha watched him in the amber glow of the parking lot, this man she had promised to love until death did them part. When exactly had he become so small in her vision? Not physically. He still maintained the polished appearance of success that had first attracted her, but something essential had shrunk, perhaps had always been shrunken, and she was only just beginning to see it clearly. "Gregory," she said calmly, "when you look at me, what do you see?" He blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. "What do I see? I don't understand." "It's a simple question. When you look at your wife, what do you see?" Gregory frowned, that annoyed expression appearing whenever he was confronted with something emotionally demanding. "I see you, Samantha. Why are you being weird?" "Just curiosity." She unlocked her car, but paused before getting in. "Because when I look at you now, I realize I don't know if I ever truly saw you either, or if I just saw what I wanted to see." "You're being dramatic again," Gregory sighed, checking his phone. Probably a message from Jessica, Samantha imagined. "Look, I'm tired. Let's just go home." But Samantha didn't go straight home. She drove aimlessly for 40 minutes, winding through Portland's lit streets as she processed the evening. There was something liberating in, finally, completely accepting who Gregory was, in ceasing to search for sparks of decency or love that simply no longer existed. Her phone rang when she stopped at a traffic light near the Willamette River. Patricia Morrison. "I hope I'm not calling too late." Patricia's voice was laced with concern. "Diane mentioned you had dinner with Gregory tonight. Just wanted to check in on you." Samantha felt her chest tighten with gratitude. "I'm fine. Better than I expected, actually." "Sometimes accepting the truth brings its own kind of peace," Patricia said, with the wisdom of someone who had navigated her own turbulent waters. "Even when the truth hurts." "It doesn't hurt anymore," Samantha realized aloud. "It's more like finally taking off a shoe that's been too tight for so long you'd forgotten your feet could feel different." Patricia chuckled softly. "That's an oddly accurate metaphor. Listen, I'm also calling because I want you to come to dinner on Friday. Nothing formal, just you, me, and maybe a few friends from the department. People who will appreciate you for who you really are." The offer brought unexpected tears to Samantha's eyes. For 3 years, her social life had been dictated by Gregory's calendar and approval. Every friendship evaluated for its usefulness to his career. Every social event measured by its networking potential. The idea of a simple dinner with people who truly cared was almost overwhelming in its normality. "I'd love that," she said, her voice thicker than she intended. "Good. 7 o'clock at my place. Wear what you want, say what you want, be who you want. There are no expectations beyond being yourself." After they hung up, Samantha sat in the car for a few more minutes, watching the dark river water reflect the city lights. In 4 weeks, everything would change. Gregory would discover the truth about the foundation, about the resources she controlled, about the woman she truly was beyond the faded shadow he had tried to make of her. But more important than his downfall was her ascent, the reclamation of an identity that had been systematically eroded by years of subtle criticism and calculated manipulation. The masquerade ball would be symbolic in more ways than one, the masks falling to reveal truths some were desperate to hide, and others eager to declare. Samantha finally drove home, where Gregory was no doubt already asleep, dreaming his dreams of financial grandeur and social domination. She would quietly ascend to her room, lie in her bed, and plan the next steps of a transformation he would never see coming. The following weeks unfolded with a surreal duality Samantha had never experienced. By day, she was the compliant wife, navigating the last vestiges of her marriage to Gregory with a tranquility he interpreted as resignation. By night, she transformed into someone else, working tirelessly in her Pearl District office, refining every detail of what would happen at the masquerade ball. Gregory had become even more careless in his public appearances with Jessica. They openly lunched at trendy restaurants, were photographed at smaller charity events, and Jessica had even posted an ambiguous photo on social media where her arm was clearly intertwined with Gregory's, though their faces were conveniently out of frame. The caption simply read, "New phase, new happiness," with a red heart emoji. Diane had warned Samantha that this could complicate the divorce, giving Gregory arguments about alienation of affection or other legal maneuvers. But Samantha didn't care. Every public display was more evidence, more documentation of Gregory's blatant disregard for their marriage. More importantly, each appearance confirmed how much he underestimated her, how much he believed she would simply passively accept everything. With 2 weeks left until the ball, Samantha had developed a meticulous routine. She woke at 6 in the morning, before Gregory, and spent an hour reviewing the final preparations on her tablet. Then she would go downstairs, prepare his coffee exactly as he liked it, and play the role he expected. It was a performance that became easier each day, precisely because she knew it had an end date. "You've been oddly agreeable lately," Gregory commented one Thursday morning, watching her over his Wall Street Journal as he drank his coffee. "Almost compliant." Jessica was there, of course, seated at the breakfast table as if she already lived there. She had started showing up in the mornings a few weeks prior, a transgression so audacious that Samantha was initially speechless. But she had swallowed her indignation, recognizing that each outrage was just more fuel for what was to come. "Just accepting reality," Samantha replied calmly, serving fresh orange juice she had squeezed. "You've made it clear where things stand. There's no point fighting the inevitable." Gregory and Jessica exchanged a look of smug satisfaction, clearly interpreting her calm as defeat. Jessica bit into a piece of toast with strawberry jam, leaving a red lipstick mark on the white porcelain. "It's refreshing to see you finally being reasonable," Jessica said, her voice carrying that fake sweetness that made Samantha's teeth clench. "Makes everything so much more civilized, don't you think?" Samantha merely smiled, an expression that didn't reach her eyes. Civility is important. That afternoon, she had her final meeting with the Masquerade Ball's organizing committee. They met at the historic Benson Hotel, in the ballroom where the event would take place. The space was magnificent, all Italian marble, crystal chandeliers that literally weighed a ton each, and that kind of timeless elegance Portland rarely managed to achieve. Victoria Pemberton, the committee chair, was a 65-year-old woman with silver hair cut in an impeccably geometric style, and a presence that commanded attention effortlessly. She had dedicated 40 years to philanthropy in Portland, and her endorsement was as valuable as gold in these circles. "Mrs. Mitchell," Victoria greeted her with air kisses on both cheeks, a habit she had picked up during years of living in France. "I'm absolutely thrilled about our reveal. $5 million, my dear. It's the largest single donation in this institution's history." Samantha accepted a glass of champagne that a waiter offered, more out of politeness than a desire to drink. "The cause deserves it. Trauma survivors need consistent resources, not just symbolic gestures. Precisely why I insisted you be our surprise reveal," Victoria agreed, guiding her through the ballroom while pointing out where each element would be positioned. "Many donors want ego recognition. You want real impact. It's refreshing, frankly." They spent the next hour reviewing every detail. The reveal would happen at 10 o'clock that night, after dinner, but before the dancing officially opened. There would be a dramatic moment where the lights would dim, a spotlight would illuminate the central stage, and the guest of honor would be called. Samantha would wear an elaborate Venetian mask until that moment, ensuring no one, especially Gregory, would recognize her prematurely. "And are you sure about the speech?" Victoria asked, her piercing eyes studying Samantha's face. "It's not mandatory, but it would be powerful." Samantha had written and rewritten that speech dozens of times, each version attempting to balance truth and discretion, impact and grace. Diane had reviewed the legal aspects, Patricia the emotional elements, and Margaret the advocacy components. It was simultaneously the most personal and most public thing she had ever done. "I'm ready," she confirmed, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Victoria smiled, a genuine gesture that transformed her aristocratic face. "You know half of Portland's social elite will be here, right? Including some who won't react well to being confronted with uncomfortable realities about inequality and trauma." "Let them not react well," Samantha replied. "The truth does not exist to comfort the comfortable." When she left the Benson, Samantha found a message from Gregory. "I've confirmed our presence at the ball. Jessica is excited. You don't need to go, obviously. It would be awkward for everyone." She typed a quick reply. "Understood. Enjoy your evening." The irony was so dense that Samantha almost laughed aloud right there on the street. Gregory was actively discouraging her presence at the one event where she would be the absolute center of attention. It was perfect in a way Hollywood screenwriters would reject as too convenient. On Friday, as promised, Samantha had dinner at Patricia's house. The professor's residence was exactly as she expected, a modest Victorian home filled with books, plants, and that kind of comfortable clutter that comes from a life truly lived. There were 3 other guests, all from Patricia's academic circle, people who spoke passionately about literature, social justice, and the complicated politics of the university. For the first time in years, Samantha felt she could breathe. No one commented on her outfit, though she was wearing simple jeans and a navy sweater that Gregory would have called effortless in a negative way. No one assessed her words for networking value. No one made her feel her presence was tolerated rather than desired. "You look different," Patricia observed as they washed dishes together in the kitchen after dinner. "Lighter, somehow." Samantha considered this as she dried a ceramic platter. "I think I finally stopped trying to be who Gregory wanted me to be. It's liberating in a strange way." "And frightening too, I imagine," Patricia added, her voice gentle. "Reclaiming your identity after years of erosion is no simple task." "No," Samantha agreed. But staying would be even scarier. Waking up in 10 years and realizing I wasted my entire life trying to win approval from someone who is incapable of truly seeing other people. Patricia paused her washing, turning to look directly at Samantha. You know that after the ball, everything will change? Gregory will retaliate somehow. Men like him always retaliate when they lose control. I know, Samantha said. Diane has prepared me for the possibilities. He might try legal complications. He might spread rumors. He might try to damage the foundation's reputation. But at least it will be me facing it all, not some diminished version of myself he constructed. The next evening, Samantha had her last social engagement before the ball. A smaller charity event Gregory had insisted she skip. You'd just embarrass us both, he had said. But it was a fundraiser for early childhood education, a cause close to Samantha's heart. So she went alone. It was there that the most unexpected encounter happened. Samantha was near the buffet table when a familiar voice said, Samantha Mitchell? My goodness, long time no see. She turned to find David Ashworth, the investor from New York who had dined with her and Gregory weeks ago. He was alone, wearing a more casual gray suit than the business suits he had worn previously, and his smile seemed genuine. David? She replied, genuinely surprised. I thought you'd gone back to New York. I did, he confirmed, picking up a canapé. But I have some additional business in Portland. My sister, the one I mentioned, she works with an organization here focused on childhood literacy, convinced me to attend before heading back. They chatted for 20 minutes, a conversation that flowed naturally in ways Samantha had forgotten conversations could flow. David asked genuine questions about her affordable housing work, shared stories about his sister's projects in Boston, and never once made her feel like she was being evaluated or judged. May I ask something personal? David said eventually, his voice low so as not to be overheard by others around them. When we had dinner with Gregory, I noticed tension, and you mentioned community work in a way that seemed important, but he quickly changed the subject. Is there more going on than you could say that night? Samantha was surprised by his perception. Most people in business circles were so absorbed in their own agendas that they completely missed the undercurrents around them. But David had noticed, and more than that, he cared enough to ask. There is, she admitted carefully, but it's complicated to explain, especially here. David nodded, not pressing. I understand. I just wanted you to know that if you ever need to, I know what it's like to be caught between who you are and who others expect you to be. I spent 20 years doing what my father expected before finally choosing my own path. They exchanged business cards before parting ways, David returning to his group and Samantha to hers. But the encounter stayed with her, a reminder that not everyone in powerful circles was like Gregory, that some people still valued authenticity over appearances. The final week before the ball passed in a controlled blur. Samantha finalized all the details of the foundation, ensured her legal response to Gregory's divorce petition was ready to be filed, and spent hours practicing her speech until every word felt natural. Diane had insisted on full rehearsals, making Samantha recite it to an empty room until she could do so without faltering. Gregory was increasingly absent, spending entire nights presumably with Jessica. He had even stopped pretending, leaving changes of clothes in the guest closet, taking her calls during dinner without apology, and openly discussing after the divorce as if it were a business update rather than the dissolution of a marriage. On Wednesday, 3 days before the ball, the legal documents were officially served. Diane personally delivered them to Gregory's office, ensuring he would receive them when Jessica was present. His reaction was exactly what they expected. Her phone exploded at 3 in the afternoon. 15 missed calls, 8 voicemails, and a flurry of texts that escalated from confusion to anger, and finally, to something bordering on panic. Samantha ignored them all, following Diane's advice not to engage until he had time to process. Finally, at 6 in the evening, Gregory appeared at the mansion. Samantha was in her private living room, reviewing final notes when she heard the front door slam. His heavy footsteps ascending the stairs were like thunder, all his corporate composure gone. "Explain this," he demanded, bursting in without knocking, throwing the documents onto her desk. 15 million? A trust? An entire foundation you're operating? What the hell is going on? Samantha looked at her husband, seeing for the first time not the powerful man who had intimidated her for years, but someone smaller, frightened, and fundamentally lost when confronted with something he couldn't control. "It's all explained in the documents, Gregory," she said calmly. "My grandmother left me resources. I used them to make a difference. You never asked what I did with my time, so I didn't tell you. You hid $15 million from me." His voice was rising, that vein in his temple throbbing the way it did when he was losing control. "I didn't hide anything. The trust was established before we met. It's completely separate from our marital assets. Check with your lawyers. They'll confirm everything I'm saying is legal and appropriate." Gregory stared at her, his brain clearly working through the implications. If she had independent resources, she didn't need him. If she had built an entire foundation, she wasn't the useless wife he had portrayed. And if all of this was legal, he had no leverage. "You made me look like an idiot," he finally said, his voice lower but laden with venom. "No," Samantha gently corrected. "You did that yourself." The door slammed shut behind Gregory with enough force to make the picture frames on the walls vibrate. Samantha remained seated for a long moment, listening to his car engine roar in the circular driveway before disappearing down the tree-lined avenue. The silence that followed was profound, almost physical in its quality, filling the spaces of the mansion that had for so long echoed with criticism and veiled contempt. She picked up the documents Gregory had thrown, smoothing the crumpled pages with deliberate movements. Diane had done an impeccable job, each clause meticulously constructed to protect not only Samantha's assets, but her dignity. There was no room for interpretation or manipulation, something Gregory had probably already discovered after showing the papers to his own lawyers. Her phone vibrated. A message from Jessica. "What did you do? Gregory is furious and not making sense. Stop complicating things and just sign the original agreement. Nobody believes that foundation farce anyway." Samantha read the message twice, almost admiring the presumptuous audacity that emanated from every word. Jessica truly believed she had the authority to make demands, that her position as current mistress gave her some kind of power in this situation. The delusion was so complete, it bordered on comical. She didn't reply. Engagement would be recognition, and Jessica didn't even deserve that. In 48 hours, the truth would reveal itself in ways no amount of indignant texts could prevent. Samantha deleted the message and blocked the number, a small act of self-care she should have done months ago. Thursday night passed in quiet preparation. Samantha reviewed her speech one last time, making small adjustments that only she would notice. She chose her dress for the ball, a midnight blue creation with delicate embroidery that caught the light like distant stars. It was elegant without being ostentatious, powerful without screaming for attention. Exactly the balance she wanted to project. Diane arrived Friday morning with coffee and croissants from a French bakery in northwest Portland, settling into Samantha's living room like a general reviewing battle plans before a decisive confrontation. Gregory hired Mitchell and Sterling to review everything, Diane informed her, biting into her croissant. They're good, but they won't find anything. The trust is ironclad, the foundation is impeccably documented, and you have credible witnesses for every transaction. Peace and the divorce matter? Samantha asked, pouring coffee into porcelain cups that had been a wedding gift from an aunt she'd never met. He'll have to accept fair terms or face a prolonged public trial. And considering Jessica is walking evidence of adultery, his lawyers are likely already advising a quick settlement. Diane paused, her eyes meeting Samantha's. But you need to be prepared for him to try something dramatic tomorrow night. Gregory isn't the type to take public humiliation quietly. Samantha had considered this extensively. Gregory might try to cause a scene, might try to publicly discredit her, might even try to prevent her from attending. But Victoria Pemberton and the ball committee were aware of the situation and had security prepared for any eventuality. Moreover, there was something deeply satisfying in knowing Gregory had no idea what was coming. "Let him try," Samantha finally said. "I've stopped worrying about what Gregory thinks or does. Tomorrow isn't about him. It's about the real work the foundation is doing, about the people we help, about showing that wealth can be used for something beyond selfish accumulation." Patricia arrived at noon, insisting on taking Samantha out for lunch, away from the mansion and all the accumulated tension. They went to a small Vietnamese restaurant in southeast Portland, the kind of place Gregory would never have deemed appropriate, with mismatched chairs and local art covering the worn walls. "Did you sleep?" Patricia asked, as soon as they sat down, studying Samantha's face with professorial concern. "A few hours," Samantha admitted. "It's hard to switch off your mind when you know everything is about to change irreversibly." "Fear or excitement?" Samantha considered as she flipped through the menu. "Both? Mostly relief, I think. For 3 years, I've lived a diminished version of myself. Tomorrow, I'll finally be whole again, publicly and unapologetically." They ordered pho and spring rolls, talking about everything except the ball, a deliberate pause that both needed. Patricia shared stories of departmental dramas at the university, while Samantha spoke about the families the foundation had recently helped, including a single mother with 3 children who now had stable housing for the first time in 5 years. "That's what matters," Patricia said, pointing her chopsticks at Samantha. "Not revenge against Gregory, though that's a deserved bonus, but the real impact on the lives of people in need. That's why your grandmother left that money. It's why you built the foundation. The rest is just necessary theater." When they returned to the mansion, a delivery truck was offloading boxes at the entrance. Samantha frowned, not remembering having ordered anything, until she saw the logo on the side of the truck. They were delivery personnel from Jessica's favorite luxury boutique. One of the workers consulted his clipboard. "Delivery for Jessica Crawford at this address." The audacity momentarily took Samantha's breath away. Jessica was having her personal shopping delivered to the house that was still technically Samantha's home, as if she already lived there, as if the divorce were a mere formality awaiting paperwork. "Wrong address," Samantha said firmly. "This is not Ms. Crawford's residence. Please check your information." The delivery person checked again, confused. "But it says here it was authorized by the owner, a Mr. Gregory Mitchell." "Mr. Mitchell has no authority to receive deliveries for his girlfriend at our marital home," Patricia interjected with the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with recalcitrant university administrators. "Please return the items to the sender." After the truck departed, Samantha sat on the front steps, an incredulous laugh escaping. She was really having deliveries sent here, as if I would just conveniently disappear to make room for her. It's a fascinating disconnect from reality, Patricia observed, sitting beside her. Gregory and Jessica built such a complete narrative about how things are that they forgot to check if it matched the truth. The rest of the afternoon passed in practical preparation. Diane returned with Margaret and Robert, all attending for a final coordination meeting before the big event. They reviewed the logistics, the order of events, the timing of the revelation, contingencies if anything went wrong. It was comforting to be surrounded by people who saw her clearly, who valued her contribution, who never made her feel she needed to diminish herself. The local press has confirmed attendance, Margaret informed. After the revelation, there will be significant interest in the foundation. We need to be prepared to capitalize on that with more donations and partnerships. I already have 3 organizations waiting to discuss collaborations, Robert added. Your donation created ripples. People want to associate with this kind of strategic philanthropy. As the sun began to set over Portland, casting the city in amber and gold hues, Samantha felt something solidify within her. It wasn't exactly confidence, though there was that. It was more like a deep acceptance that, no matter what happened in the next 24 hours, she had made choices that honored her values. She had transformed pain into purpose, humiliation into action, invisibility into impact. Gregory called at 8 in the evening, the first direct communication since his outburst the previous day. Samantha considered not answering, but curiosity won. "Can we talk like adults?" His voice was controlled, that negotiating tone he used with difficult clients. Clearly, there have been misunderstandings on both sides. Perhaps we can reach a mutually beneficial agreement. "There are no misunderstandings, Gregory," Samantha replied calmly, "and there is no agreement to be made beyond what has already been proposed. The terms are fair and non-negotiable." "You're being emotional," he tried, changing tactics. "I understand you're hurt, but this doesn't have to be dramatic. We can resolve everything discreetly, without involving more people or creating public spectacles." Samantha almost laughed at the irony. Gregory, who had paraded Jessica publicly for months, who had humiliated her in restaurants and at events, was now asking for discretion. But she kept her voice neutral, refusing to be provoked. "The lawyers can handle the details. I have nothing further to discuss with you directly." She paused, then added, "I hope you enjoy the ball tomorrow, Gregory. I hear it will be memorable." She hung up before he could reply, blocking his number as she had done with Jessica's. The bridges were burned now. There was no longer any pretense of civility or possibility of reconciliation. Just the naked truth awaiting revelation. Patricia had insisted on staying the night, concerned about leaving Samantha alone in the empty mansion. They ordered Thai food, watched an old movie without paying much attention, and eventually retired to separate rooms as the clock struck midnight. Samantha lay in her bed, gazing at the ornate ceiling she had stared at so many nights during her marriage. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the masks would fall, literally and figuratively, revealing truths that some would celebrate and others would lament. But regardless of the reactions, Samantha would know that she had remained true to herself, to her grandmother's values, and to the work that truly mattered. She finally fell asleep as the first light of morning began to filter through the curtains, dreaming not of the upcoming ball, but of the office in the Pearl District, of the families they had helped, of the future she was building, piece by piece, choice by choice. It was a tranquil dream, devoid of anxiety or fear, just the silent certainty that she was finally walking toward the light, after years in the shadows. The Benson Hotel ballroom sparkled like an unsettling fairy tale, all gold and crystal, with hundreds of guests wearing elaborate masks that transformed familiar faces into enigmatic strangers. Samantha arrived at 8:15, 15 minutes after the official start time, wearing her Venetian mask in silver and blue that covered the upper half of her face. Her midnight blue gown flowed around her as she navigated through groups of conversation, invisible despite being entirely present. Across the ballroom, she spotted Gregory immediately. Even masked, his posture was unmistakable, that arrogant bearing of someone convinced of his own importance. Jessica was glued to his arm, wearing a red dress that screamed for attention and a golden mask that barely disguised her features. They circulated among the guests like self-proclaimed royalty, Gregory making his business connections while Jessica laughed too loudly, sparkled too brightly, tried too hard to demonstrate that she belonged. Victoria Pemberton found Samantha near the champagne table, her keen eyes recognizing her despite the mask. The organizer wore a deep purple creation that made her antique jewelry sparkle against her pale skin. "Are you ready?" Victoria asked softly, her hand lightly touching Samantha's arm. "More than ever," Samantha replied, surprised by how true the words felt. Dinner was served at 8:30, with guests settling at round tables decorated with arrangements of white flowers and candles casting dancing shadows. Samantha was seated at the head table, strategically positioned where she could see Gregory and Jessica without being noticed. They were 3 tables to the left, Gregory gesticulating animatedly as he spoke with an older couple, Jessica constantly adjusting her hair, checking her reflection in the crystal glasses. "She can't keep still," Margaret observed, following Samantha's gaze. The Foundation's counselor was seated to her right, her own mask in earthy tones perfectly matching her moss-green dress. "Nervousness or nature?" "Insecurity," Samantha replied softly. "Beneath all that arrogance, Jessica knows she doesn't truly belong. That's why she tries so intensely to prove otherwise." Diane was on the other side, elegant in black with a lace mask that made her eyes seem even more piercing. "Gregory is nervous, too. See how he keeps checking his phone, probably hoping his lawyers will find a magical way to invalidate the trust." The food was excellent, though Samantha could barely taste it. Her stomach was tight with anticipation, each passing minute intensifying the reality of what was about to happen. She had memorized her speech, rehearsed her posture, prepared every word. But there was still that small voice questioning if she had the courage to actually do it. Patricia, seated directly opposite, seemed to read her thoughts. "You were born for this moment," she said low enough for only Samantha to hear. "Everything you've been through, every humiliation, every night crying, every doubt about your own worth, it all led to this point. It's not about revenge. It's about truth." At 9:45, after desserts had been served and preliminary speeches concluded, Victoria ascended the small stage set up in the center of the ballroom. The lights dimmed gradually, focusing all attention on the organizer as she took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice resonated through the sound system, clear and commanding. "Tonight is special for many reasons, but primarily because we have the privilege of honoring an extraordinary philanthropist whose generosity will transform lives for years to come." Samantha felt her heart quicken, each beat echoing in her ears. Diane squeezed her hand under the table, a silent gesture of encouragement. "Rarely do we witness donations of this magnitude," Victoria continued. $5 million earmarked specifically to support trauma survivors, expand mental health services, and create safe housing for those escaping dangerous situations. But more impressive than the amount is the humility with which it was given. Gregory was leaning forward now, clearly curious about who would be revealed. Jessica whispered something in his ear, likely speculating about which tech executive or heiress was about to receive recognition. "Our benefactor requested anonymity until tonight," Victoria said, her eyes discreetly meeting Samantha's across the ballroom. She built an entire foundation over the past 18 months, working quietly, focused on impact rather than recognition. The Heartwood Foundation has already helped hundreds of families, and this donation will multiply that impact exponentially. A murmur went through the ballroom. The Heartwood Foundation was known in social service circles, but few among the social elite present were aware of its existence. Please join me in welcoming the founder and principal benefactor of the Heartwood Foundation. Victoria extended her hand toward the head table, Samantha Whitmore Mitchell. The moment that followed seemed suspended in time. Samantha rose gracefully, removing her mask as she walked toward the stage. The ballroom erupted in polite applause that gradually changed in quality as guests began to process what they were seeing. Victoria deliberately used her full name, including Whitmore, her grandmother's surname, which carried weight in philanthropic circles. But the reaction that mattered was 3 tables to the left. Samantha didn't need to look directly to see Gregory freeze. His wine glass paused halfway to his mouth. Jessica simply gaped, her expression of confusion slowly morphing into comprehending horror. Samantha ascended the stage, accepting the microphone from Victoria with steadier hands than she expected. From her vantage point, she could see the entire ballroom, 500 people wearing elaborate masks, all focused on her. And in the corner of her vision, Gregory pushing his chair back, his body language screaming shock and contained rage. "Thank you, Victoria, and thank you all for being here tonight," Samantha began, her voice surprisingly calm. 18 months ago, I inherited resources from my grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, with a simple condition: use them to make a real difference in the world. She was a woman who believed that wealth carries responsibility, that privilege demands action. The guests listened politely, but Samantha could feel the undercurrents of curiosity. Many knew who she was as Gregory's wife, had seen her quiet appearances at events, perhaps even witnessed some of the humiliations he inflicted. "I created the Heartwood Foundation because I saw critical need in our community," she continued, her eyes briefly meeting Patricia's, then Margaret's, then Diane's. Families without stable housing, women escaping abusive relationships, children needing educational support. These are not statistical abstractions. They are real people with real stories, deserving of dignity and opportunity. Gregory was standing now, trying to discreetly signal to her, his mask removed, revealing an expression of poorly contained panic. Jessica was tugging at his arm, clearly wanting to leave, but he was frozen, unable to depart without causing a bigger scene. "The foundation operated quietly because the work mattered more than recognition," Samantha said, her voice gaining strength. "Every dollar went to programs, not publicity. Every decision focused on impact, not image. And in these 18 months, we have helped 233 families find stable housing, provided legal representation for 147 abuse survivors, and created educational programs reaching almost 1,000 children." The applause this time was warmer, more genuine. People were beginning to understand that it wasn't just about money, but about real, tangible work. "This $5 million donation will allow us to expand dramatically," Samantha continued. "But more importantly, I hope it inspires others to think about how they can use their resources. Wealth can be a tool for change, or a shield for isolation. It can build bridges or walls. The choice is ours, individually and collectively." She paused, letting the words sink in. Then she added, her voice softer but clearly audible, "Sometimes it takes time to find our purpose. Sometimes one needs to go through difficult periods to discover one's strength. But when we finally find that purpose, when we stop living by others' expectations and start honoring our own values, that's when true transformation happens." It wasn't a direct attack on Gregory, but everyone in the ballroom who knew her situation understood the reference. Samantha saw familiar faces reacting, some women nodding subtly, some men shifting uncomfortably. "Thank you for everyone's generosity in supporting this cause," Samantha concluded. "Together, we can make a difference that lasts, that transforms, that honors the inherent dignity of every person in our community." The ovation was instantaneous and genuine, people rising to their feet, applause filling the ballroom. Victoria embraced Samantha warmly as discreet flashes from photographers captured the moment. Reporters were already taking notes, clearly recognizing that this was a more interesting story than they had expected to cover. Samantha descended the stage, immediately surrounded by people wanting to greet her, ask questions about the foundation, offer support. But her eyes sought Gregory, finding him standing near the exit, Jessica pulling at him insistently. His expression was complex, a mixture of humiliation, anger, and something that might have been reluctant respect. David Ashworth appeared unexpectedly, his surprised presence genuine. "Samantha," he said warmly, taking her hand. "Now I completely understand that conversation at the early childhood education event. You are extraordinary." "Just doing what needs to be done," she replied, but her smile was genuine. "My sister will want to meet you," David continued. "Her projects in Boston could benefit from your expertise. And frankly, investors like me should be channeling more resources into work like yours." More people joined, creating a circle of conversation that naturally excluded Gregory and Jessica. Samantha watched them finally leave, Gregory dragging Jessica, who turned repeatedly to look back, her expression mixing disbelief and impotent rage. Margaret appeared at her side. "The press wants an interview. 3 organizations have already inquired about partnerships, and Victoria said that 2 other major donors were inspired to increase their own contributions." "That's what matters," Samantha said, feeling that deep satisfaction that came not from revenge, but from purpose fulfilled. The real impact. The night continued in a blur of conversations, business cards exchanged, promises of future meetings. Samantha navigated it all with a grace she didn't know she possessed, answering questions about the foundation, sharing stories of the families helped, articulating a vision for the future. It was only as the ball was winding down, guests departing in small groups, that Diane finally managed to pull her into a quiet corner. "Gregory sent a message through his lawyer," Diane informed. "He accepts the proposed terms. He wants the divorce finalized quickly, discreetly." "And Jessica?" Samantha asked, genuine curiosity coloring her voice. Apparently, there was a scene in the parking lot. Someone from Victoria's staff overheard Jessica yelling about how he made her look like an idiot, how he promised you were nothing. Diane smiled dryly. It seems their relationship might not survive reality. Samantha should have felt satisfaction at this, but all she felt was weariness and relief. Not joy in their downfall, only peace in her own ascendance. Patricia and Margaret joined them, forming a protective circle. "You did it," Patricia said softly. "You transformed pain into power, invisibility into impact." "Who? Your grandmother would be proud," Margaret added. Samantha looked at these women who had supported her, seen her worth, when she could barely see it herself, believed in the work when it would have been easier to question. And she realized it wasn't just about Gregory or the ball or even the foundation. It was about reclaiming a life that was authentically hers, about refusing narratives others tried to impose, about choosing purpose over approval. The masks had fallen, literally and figuratively, revealing truths that some celebrated and others lamented. But regardless of the reactions, Samantha was finally, completely, undeniably free. And in that, there was power that no divorce, no scandal, no past humiliation could diminish. It was the power of knowing her own worth, living her own values, and building a life that honored both her pain and her strength. The ball was ending, but her true story was just beginning.